All right. Welcome everybody to a special presentation from some of the board members of the AAJLJ who have recently taken some very special trips to Israel and are going to be here discussing their experiences in different capacities. We have Rhonda Lees, one of our VPs. We have Robert Garson, of course, our president, and Mark Landis, one of our long-term board members. So whoever wants to begin, let's take it away. We want this to be, pretty informal. I think if you have questions, you can write them, but also after everybody gets done speaking, we can, you can indicate that you want to speak and we'll make sure to accommodate you. So we'll just get started. Whoever wants to get started, please go ahead. And thanks again for joining the AAJLJ.
Rhonda, why don't you start?
Rob, why don't you start?
Okay, I'll start, I suppose. Ever since the atrocities occurred on October 7th, many of us felt lacking somewhat. And on a personal level, I've got a lawyer that Steve Greenwald knows very well. He's associated with my firm as an of-counsel. He was also an intern for the American Association of Jewish Lawyers way back in the day. And he is, over the past God knows how many years, has been doing miluim, has been doing reserve duty, but we're talking about 60 days of reserve duty every year in, year out, for the Duvdevan unit, which is the unit people may know from Fauda. He got in touch with me very soon after the atrocities and said, look, Rob, I've been called up. I don't have the correct amount of body, I don't have the right body armor. We're sent out without body armor. So I sourced and spoke to a charity and paid them quite a lot of money to try and get him some body armor. After a month, he called me back and said, I still don't have it. So I called the charity and said, what's going on? And they said, look, we can't prioritize one person and one person only. Your money has been put to good use. We can show you where it's gone to, etc. So I thought, stuff this for a laugh. I bought a set of high-end body armor, 2 tactical helmets, and booked a ticket to go 3 days later. After I promised with my wife I won't go anywhere near Gaza. Once I told people I was going, within, I'd say, about half an hour, a doctor called me here in Miami and said, look, I've got this combat ventilator that I need taken over. I can't give it to anybody. It costs about $15,000. Will you take it? Okay. Spoke to United Hatzalah. No, United Hatzalah then called me. I've got another 2 bags. Could you take it? Okay. A kid who is serving in a paratroop regiment alongside one of my best friend's children, his mother was in Palm Beach, said, I've got another bag. Could you take it? Okay. So cut a long story short, and then I made the mistake of paying for these bags to go as regular baggage. And that will come to a slightly different story. I fly up to Newark. I'm checking in there and they said, sorry, we're filled with trumot, what they call donations. We can only take so many more because they don't charge the same level. So I said, look, I paid for these as proper bags, not donation bags. And look at my receipt. Here we go. They let me take all these bags through. One thing I might say, so this was first night Hanukkah. Number one, there was a guy on the plane that had a little light up Hanukkah. And secondly, I was surrounded by Baptist ministers going to Israel to go and lend their support. And one thing I'd ever say, if you ever want to go on a plane where there's nobody complaining, go with Baptist ministers. Right? Whereas I normally don't fly El Al. However, you have people go, I don't want this seat, I don't want that seat. They were so upbeat about, I will sit on whatever seat I can. I'm going to Israel and I'm going to lend my support. So after chatting to them for a long time, right, cut a long story short, get into Israel, get in there on Friday. And the airport was totally dead. It was desolate. You know, you went down that long ramp that everybody knows, and instead of being completely filled, it was just filled with pictures of hostages as you went down. And I noticed just how quiet it was. I paid for a VIP guy to get me through, and because the line for donations was so long, I said, right, let's go around the other way. I'm now going to admit to a crime. I go to the not to declare line, and the guy's like, really? These are donations? And no, they're not. I go, well, what do you need 1,000 Imodium tablets for? Oh, my father's a doctor. What do you need 264 tourniquets for? I told you he's a doctor. Look him up. This is where his apartment is. This is where he is. And why do you have body armor? Oh, that's for me. And why do you need 2 helmets? Well, just in case I get shot in one. You know, who doesn't have 2 helmets? They eventually said, all right, stuff it, go away. Go through. Immediately when I get out there, people were waiting to meet me. One person take one bag, one person take another bag. And then a friend picked me up, went to Herzliya because a lot of the displaced people and hostages were being housed in Herzliya in the hotels there. And they were cooking. He was cooking. He's a tour guide, so he's got no job at the moment. So he and his wife were cooking for the hostages to take them Friday night dinners, which I was also had taken over some. My daughter had a bat mitzvah, take over some hadlakat nerot sets, some Friday night candle sets to give to the families. Then he said to me, do you want to meet some of the hostage families? And I said, no. I said, the last thing a girl needs from having spent 60 days in Gaza is to meet Robert Garson. And I certainly don't need it for the Instagram movement. I've done my job. I need to go and get some sleep. Shabbat was Shabbat, and one would think that was lovely with the people in Shul in Herzliya, which, you know, whilst I know many of them, I don't get invited in, even though I bought my own food. Everybody said, right, you're here, what are you doing here, why are you here, and was inviting me in. And you started to feel that in Israel there was a sense of achdut, a sense of togetherness, brotherhood, sisterhood, whatever it was, that I'd never felt. The last time I'd been in Israel had been during the summer, where all the demonstrations were occurring against the government, and I found it a completely flipped on its head. Whereas I went out to see some friends on Saturday night in Tel Aviv, and aside from being struck by the fact there were no men of kind of my age and younger around because they were all fighting, restaurant normally in Tel Aviv, I'll go to a place and said, oh, are you kosher? They'll go, don't be ridiculous. Of course we're not kosher. Now a lot of these places have gone kosher so that they can cater for families and for soldiers. And the credit has to go to the Rabbanut of Tel Aviv for fast tracking the kashrut to occur, that to go through. It's kind of everybody was together. Sunday morning, I was with a friend of mine who used to be a Sanchan, and we went down, who used to be a paratrooper. We went quickly to Jerusalem to drop off body armor for Lenny, a whole load of medical supplies for the Kitot Konanut, for many of the, for some of the local, if you're going to call them securities, for some of the Moshavim, and then dropped off the ventilator, and then went down we were going to Netivot to meet up with the governor of the Negev area. He's the governor for 20% of the whole land mass of Israel. But as we were going there, because my friend lived in Israel for a long time, he can never take directions. And we told him where to stop, and he didn't stop where he was supposed to stop. So we stopped in a moshav called Shokadam. And when we got there, they'd set up washing machines and food, and there were volunteers there for local for reservists who were there serving down, because you're now down near Gaza. And I broke my promise to my wife. We're down near the Gaza border. She woke up, she's got that iPhone tracker on me, called me up and said, what the hell are you doing? You're like 5 miles from Gaza, not even. So they'd be quiet. And we went but my friend wanted to go and put on his tefillin in the morning on the Moshav Shokadam. He went to put his tefillin on. I'd, of course, done it. And went next door. There was a group of soldiers there doing their Daf Yomi, their daily Talmud. And I sit down and start doing it with them. I start talking to them and said, which regiment are you from? And they said, the way they could explain it was they're the Zaka for the army. But which are the people that will go in and tag bodies for the army. And I asked them when they'd been on from, and they said from day one, right from the beginning. But they were all reservists. 2 of them were lawyers. People that had given up, that on that October 7th had been mobilized to drive down to do what they did. And we had these people have clearly changed people. And I asked them what we're talking about what really struck you. And they said, well, with the terrorists, what struck us first was they had no medical equipment. And I said, what did that indicate to you? And he said, well, he said, what soldier doesn't have medical equipment? What soldier doesn't have medical equipment to save one of their own soldiers? They weren't there to be soldiers. They weren't expecting to come back. And then the other thing I asked, I said, and what else struck you? And they said, the sexual atrocities. And I said, well, what do you mean? And one of them said, I'm a criminal lawyer and I've never seen this. And it's funny, I did crime for 10 years and I dealt with rape cases, but I've never dealt with mutilations alongside. And that set me on a whole different area of research, because I've spoken to many criminal barristers and many coroners that I know, and none of them have had dealt with mutilation in the sexual context. And that was a very difficult conversation to have. That was taken then later on by the governor of the Negev area down to the Ze'elim base. On the way, we stopped at an artillery unit that was still firing on Gaza at that point. I met with them, and then went to the Ze'elim base, which is one of the main bases for training, where they have actually set up. They've built a Gaza replica, which is funny because in the 90s I worked in Gaza, and it was as an archaeologist, and it had eerie context, and you saw different units training in different ways, the tunnel area, minaret area, this area and that area. And it struck me once again how young all of these soldiers were. And sat, chat, met with soldiers, spoke to them, hugged them, lots of hugging. And a lot of the people didn't realize, they didn't understand what we were there for. That night I slept on a kibbutz. I was asked to go in a moshav, a very small part of a moshav. I was asked to go and help because they needed helpers. And the next day I spent a day straightening olive trees, which is a thing. The olive trees need to be straightened, and they need people. They don't have workers there at the moment. But after that day, I was flying back. But one of the things that struck me most was this. Beersheba is only an hour and a half from Tel Aviv, but the gulf on an interpersonal, or as people are, is completely different. Myself and the guy I was with, Marcel, we went into one of the malls because I wanted, before going back, I wanted to pick up some of the the bring them home dog tags. So we were looking for them, and we went in and we saw Fox, which is the equivalent of Gap in Israel. They were selling them. So we walked in and we said to the girl there, hi, could we buy some? How much are they each? And she said 30 shekels. And we said, all right, we'll take 30. And the girl said, and she said, I beg your pardon. I said, we'll take 30. Give it 30. The girl starts immediately crying. And she said, what are you doing? You're buying 30. That's 900 shekels. That's a lot of money. I said, look, it's going to the hostages. It helps raise awareness. I want to give them out, when we get back. She calls over a friend. She goes, you can't believe this. These guys, where are you from? We said, we're from Miami. Tears. They call in other people. They just didn't understand why somebody would come from Miami to Israel to support. She said, how long you been here? I said, yeah, I think I've been here by that point 3.5 days. What you doing? We're here to support. We're here to give hugs. You know, you're Jewish. We're Jewish. You're Israeli. We're Israeli. One of the girls said, I'm not Jewish. I said, who cares? You're Israeli. And she starts crying and she hugs me and she calls her dad and says, you know, she was a girl actually, if I was going to call it a lapsed Bedouin, she was a Bedouin of Bedouin descent, but wasn't covered up herself. And it was very much a moment. It's one of those moments that only happen in Israel. You know, where you see, like when I was down on the base, I saw ultra-Orthodox guys cooking for the soldiers. These ultra-Orthodox guys who probably would never, prior to the atrocities, have been seen in Israel, have been seen amongst soldiers, were now there cooking, sitting down, and being there amongst soldiers. Going back to the airport on the way back, whereas again, the airport was completely and utterly dead, more dead going out than coming in. And the plane was empty coming out. And I kind of made a point. I tried to go and buy things at the different shops along the way, because as you walked in, people were like, oh, wow, I've got somebody. And that's what struck me. Again, very few young men were about working in the airport. A lot of it was, you know, women, older people, because all the men are away at war. What struck me most was Israel was a change. It's a changed place from the summer. It's changed not just in terms of like it's funny. I've got friends of mine who were, when I say remarkably left wing, in terms of how they believe two states could work potentially in harmony, how the Palestinian issue could be resolved and brought to a head. And then now, like one of my friends used to live on an kibbutz, which would be a city kibbutz, a kibbutz in the city. And he is now remarkably despondent and pushing towards the right. But then again, I see friends of mine who would sit very much on the right wing have now pushed very much towards the middle. Until the way I feel, until we see how the dust all settles, we don't know how Israel is going to be in the aftermath. There's a lot of upset, a lot of anger, a lot of bitterness, but also a lot of hope, a lot of understanding that Israel now sits very much within the Jewish world. Because, you know, I was speaking to a friend of mine at Herzog Fox last year. They had to give a seminar on anti-Zionism, because a lot of the Israelis didn't understand why anybody would possibly be anti-Zionist or anti-Semitic. Like, well, why not? We've got one of the most inclusive, integrated societies. And they had to give seminars on that. Now, unfortunately, many of the Israelis understand. So those are my prime experiences. And I'm sorry if I've spoken a little bit long. Rhonda, over to you.
Okay, great. Hello, everybody. And thank you to friends, family, and colleagues for joining us today. I want to talk a little bit about my experience. The impetus was I wanted to go, and the World Jewish Congress, in a span of about 3 weeks, had put together a lawyer solidarity conference. And I didn't have all the details down, but it looked really interesting. It was going to be, beginning in Tel Aviv. And I contacted them. I one of the organizations that we're involved with. We're the American Association of Jewish Lawyers and Jurists, but the International has a relationship with them. So I heard about the conference through them. And so I wrote to them and this, I'm sorry, it's full. Oh, that's so sad. And then I said, you know what? I'm supposed to have skills, right? You're supposed to negotiate. And I called them up and I said, is it about a hotel room? You know, what's the scenario? And they said, no, it's because we are going to be going to the South. And there is a limited number of people that the IDF can take at one time. She said, but you're just one person, you're in. So I got very excited. And that was going to be 3 days. And then I figured I have to adjust to jet lag. And I also made plans to get together with some friends. And then I was off. So a couple of things. First of all, I decided I took LL, which I have not taken in, I don't know, decades. And it was a very different experience. I kind of geared myself to have an argument with, very religious men who did not want to be in the same plane with me. And it was the opposite. I had very lovely conversations with people when I wasn't trying to sleep. Anyway, get into Tel Aviv very, very early in the morning. And my hotel is not going to be open for half a day. So I decided to take the train, and I'm on the train and I'm looking around, and, it's early in the morning, so people are relatively quiet. And I see a kid reading a book in Arabic. Nobody remarks on it. Arab, I don't know whether he was Arab, Israeli, just studying. I have no idea, but not remarkable for Israel. And then I arrive at my hotel, and it's a place I've stayed at before. And I check in and I say, oh, I'd love to go to the gym. And say, well, we have the gym is closed. And the gym was closed because, as Rob was saying, a lot of adjustments had to be made. So the hotel accepted a lot of refugees from the north, and they were families with little kids who had to go to school. So they brought in a teacher, and there was going to be a kindergarten going on. And the hotel also, they brought in washing machines, and they brought them to the gym, what was going to be the gym, so that they would be able to do laundry for the soldiers and for other people who needed it. And as I'm sitting down, the woman said, go to breakfast. I'm like, no, I don't need to eat. I'm like, she goes, no, it's really good. I said, oh, I know it's going to be good, but if you put food in front of me, I'm going to eat. She said, well, you have to eat something. So I sat there and I was sitting at my table. And I want to explain this carefully because, again, like the scenario that I described with the young man, it's just so emblematic of Israel. There was a young woman who was a Black woman. She was speaking to her daughter, both in Ethiopian, from the one word that I recognized, in Hebrew, and she's trying to keep the little girl engaged. And then I see the mother sort of look at her coffee cup to see that it's empty, and then she looks up. And in the time that it takes her to look up, somebody from another table who didn't know her gets up, walks over to her, sits down also across from the baby, occupies the baby so the mother can get up, get some coffee, get some food, and come back. Like, unremarkable. They didn't speak for very long, but it was a huge feeling of solidarity, and that's how it began. So my plan was to get together with however many people that I could beforehand. And one of the people that I saw was a lovely woman I've known for a long time. She's got 3 kids under 9, and she and her husband both work. And work it's not at 100%, but they still have to raise the kids and keep the kids in school. And so trying to do that with an air of normalcy. And, you try not to ask the question, how are you doing? Because it's a really hard one to answer. And I said, I've known you long enough, or how do I ask you? And she said, it's a dialectic, right? I mean, part of it is there's a war on and they hate us. And part of it is I've got 3 kids and I have to, keep them as safe and safe as possible. So we ended up hanging out at a restaurant, and then the next day I got together with another friend who had been in and out of the government, and she said, do you mind if we don't talk politics? I said, this is your time, whatever you want to do is going to be great. And then the next day before I left, I had placed a word out to some people that I know, both at my office and other places. And I said, I'm going to be in Israel. And those of you who don't know, it is a Jewish tradition to bring notes from people and put them in the wall. 26 people took me up on that. And I mean, very touched by that. And I felt that I really had to do this correctly. And the weather was terrible. And so I basically, I figured out how to get to Jerusalem, and then I ran and then I took care of it and they ran back. But that was actually very moving for me. And I am not a religious person. So the next day I got together with a longtime friend. She's a teacher, and she wanted to take me to the square for the hostages. And so I went. Alyssa, I don't know if I can share. If not, not a problem. But can you guys see the picture, the photo? Okay. It's a very famous one. And basically it is tables and chairs, blue and white, some decorations, and the plates all have the saying that says, it's good that you'll be home. So that was obviously a pretty big deal. Okay, so let's see how I can move on from that. All right. And then after that, there was trying to describe it. It's basically fake tunnels. And I took photos. I can't show them because it reveals people who are in there. But basically imagine it's 5.5 foot tall, maybe a little wider than that. But these are replicas of the tunnels. Now we've, since found out that the tunnels are, 1,000 feet or 1,000 miles. But you're inside there. And if you want to be in there, it's a really good experience. And if you don't, you can see how oppressive that could be. Again, this is a picture of the plates, but that's what we did. I think this photo is really instructive. Among other things, it says, "Am Israel High, the people of Israel lives." The photos are about hope. They are about bring the hostages home. They're about, but it's the people of Israel lives. It's about solidarity and hope. And you heard a lot of that, no matter who you were with, or no matter who you talked to. And then the conference began. So the first night was a solidarity conference and a question and answer with Herzog Law Firm, as well as with a former member of the government. And people thanked us for being there. Now, by this point, I apologize. I had joined the WJC conference, and I see that two of my folks from there, Glenn and Polly, are new friends. And we went there and we met and we talked to people and talked to each other. So the next day we go to the south, and this was at Kfar Aza. I did not tell my family or my office that I was going to go to the places that I was. I made that choice. But this is, this is a children's center, and that got, rocketed, got bombed. And it gives you an idea of, this is what it looked like. This was October 7th at 7:30 in the morning, and all of a sudden their lives would never be the same again. We also got a chance to meet with the trauma response team at Ashkelon Hospital. And for context, they treated 335 people within that 18 hours. And it was a holiday. It was Shabbat. So like any major hospital in any major city, you put a holiday, plus early in the weekend, they're never at full staff. So it was a lot of triage and coordinating and calling people. Can you take these people? Can you, we can handle this here. We'll bring them somewhere else later. But the moment they got the calls about the ambulance, the day really started in earnest. This is what it looks like now, but you can't see all the different machines. This is a wildly equipped hospital that was learning from what had happened before and was continuing to basically take care of as many people as they could as they were brought in and dispatch them as quickly as possible. Why did I take this picture? I took this picture because on top of everything else that was going on, here are little birds. I don't know if they're parakeets or otherwise, but it's this dichotomy between we're in a war zone, they hate us, they're shooting us, we're defending ourselves. But at the same time, we want pretty pictures and we want birds and we want things around us that will help us stay optimistic. And this is a bottle recycling, and I just love it. Again, it's the same thing. In the midst of everything, they're trying to maintain a sense of normalcy. So while I have that picture up there, as part of the conference, so we're in that second day, we've been to the hospital. We went to 3 very important places. So one of them was Kfar Aza, which was the kibbutz, 1 kilometer away from Gaza. They were neighbors. They would send kites back and forth to each other with shalom and salam on them. These were the absolute peaceniks. Their homes, they didn't keep weapons inside their homes. It was all about, how are we the model for the world for how to live together? So that was one of the places that we saw. And you'll see what the devastation is, what it looks like now. Second place we saw, I'm not sure what you can see too well, but Rob mentioned Zakah. So Zakah is the organization that identifies the bodies and the remains. So these are all the cars that the festival goers, remember, the young kids, they had been partying, they had been drinking, they may have been doing whatever else. I mean, it was my understanding of what Burning Man was 20 years ago. And once the atrocities hit and once the terrorists came over, they tried to jump in their cars to leave. And among the barbaric and sadistic things that happened was the terrorists threw in like grenades so that these kids wouldn't just die, they would just die horribly. And Sakah's role is to identify the remains, to be able to identify the names of the people who died, and they had incomplete information, and it's very, very hard, and it's very, very sacred work, but you saw what they had to deal with. This is the site of the festival, and there are poles with flags, and mainly it's the name of the people who died or the people who have been taken hostage. And this was finally a nice day, right? So you have the dichotomy, the sun is shining, and yet you're in the middle of this incredible atrocity, but with a lot of hope. It's the flag, it's bring them home. Again, just a kid, kid and his friends. People are waiting fairly desperately. Again, we'll talk later about meeting with the families of the hostages, but it's release me, it's kidnapped, letting the world know. And then this is in Kfar Aza. And again, this real peace-knit kibbutz. It was not enough that they were murdered in their homes, but the looting. I mean, the people came in and they took everything. They took the terrorists came in and they took the televisions. They took the pets, they took the cows, and they burnt what was left. And we saw a number of homes. They requested that we not show homes where the names of the families were there, but this was representative of it. And this is what it looked like. Oh, something else important to mention. We were there during the 100 days. So no one expected this to go on for 100 days. And now it's at like 104, but really important to see what this is. Again, this is one of the homes, people were brutally murdered inside this house. Families, mainly young families that were there. Okay, I see I have about 3 more minutes. Again, another picture like this. 101 days. This is back in Tel Aviv. We went after a fabulous evening where there was like a soldier's way station, and it's literally where the soldiers, they go to relax, talk, listen to music, hug, eat, drink, talk to each other. And they let us come by and talk to them. And I'm sure that some of them just wanted to sleep, but it was in Hebrew, it was in Spanish, it was in French, it was in whatever their languages. But that was a pretty fabulous experience just to see that. And that was so Israeli, in the midst of all this, they're going to, put together some wood and make an area, and there was donated food, and there were playing cards. I didn't play, but it was just, you were there to show solidarity to the soldiers. Again, this is back in Tel Aviv. This is 101 days. Red Cross, do your job. Again, that was the strongest sentiment that I saw. Mainly it was about, devastation, but solidarity and hope. And then we met with the families of the hostages. So I think it was about 7 or 8 different families. And they're wiped out. I mean, emotionally, they have nothing left, but they keep pushing, they keep telling the story. And it was everything from, this is my son, or this is my daughter, or one man had, he had served in all the wars and he got a phone call from his son. He's like, let me come down. Said, no, please don't. We know that the army's coming. Just imagine the guilt, but, begging for our help to help bring them home. It was very, I mean, I don't want to say grueling because it's not about me, but it was just so hard, but so important to hear all that. And then later on that day, we met with another law firm. And, this is so Israeli, right? I mean, that's how they feel. And there's I don't want to say gallows humor, but it's devastation, but also, you push forward and you believe in hope as much as possible. Here's another great photo of Israel. People serving the IDF, a religious man, Jewish, or a religious man who's Muslim. I want to go on, but let me just make 2 final comments. One of them is we also picked oranges. I don't have a picture, but I assure you, I just did not hurt myself. So that was really good. The second thing is, emotionally, we are up and down. Like sometimes it's just devastating, and other times it's very hopeful. And if I were to tell people what I've learned, in addition to what I've talked about, it is you can do both things. You can both be devastated and horrified and angry and depressed about it and still find an area of hope and raise the kids and move on. Okay. Thank you.
So, Rhonda, you actually got to harvest oranges. On my trip, we got rained out from our harvesting part of the expedition. I traveled, hi everybody, just by way of introduction, in addition to serving on the AAJLJ board, I serve on the executive board of the Reformed Jewish Movement in North America. So I traveled right after Thanksgiving with a leadership cohort representing both the North American and the world movements of Reform and Progressive Judaism. There were about 25 of us. About a third were rabbis. The rest were, people, lay leaders involved like me. Getting there was not easy. Only El Al was flying, and direct flights were, hard to come by. We all flew separately, and arrived there on a Sunday evening, had dinner with our leadership counterparts, and then we were on mission schedule, if not even a little bit more. That meant that we were getting up at 6 a.m. Because optional shachrit was at 6:45. We were on the road typically between 7:30 and 8 in the morning, getting back 9 or 10 at night. We were based out of the Don Panorama in Tel Aviv that was about 90% filled with evacuee families. And, there were a handful of rooms for folks like us. We lucked out. It was ceasefire week. So while I did make sure I always knew where the nearest shelter was while traveling around, and my wife wanted to go too, but we decided to observe the only one parent in a war zone at the same time rule. She's going next month instead. We went south on the first day, and the first place we went may not strike you as the most logical place, but we went to a town of Hura, which is a Bedouin community, a stable, rooted Bedouin community right near Beersheba, literally across the road from where my cousins live in Meitar, and came away with the the critical message that the Jews in Israel are not alone. The Bedouin community remains allied, supportive of the state of Israel, supportive of Jews. There are people from that community who drove to the music festival to try to rescue people. People were shot and killed. People were taken hostage. what many people don't realize, you heard, of course, the tragic story of the 3 hostages who were shot by friendly fire while in Gaza when the IDF didn't realize. 2 of them were Jewish Israelis, and the third one was a son of the community in Hura. They are dealing with fake news. They are trying to make sure they can continue to build, what is a shared society. And of course, it benefited greatly from Jewish Israelis who felt the same way and who committed to support their community centers and their programs to get youth involved, to provide medical training for people to support their communities. From there, we went as close as we could get at that point to the Gaza envelope, which was at Kibbutz Sderot. They were not first line. They were not attacked there, but they're literally across the road from the community of Sderot. So they could see and they could hear what was happening. We spent time there with the handful of people who remained, because out of 850 people who would normally be there, they were down to 100. Everybody else had been quickly evacuated to other places, either in the far south or in the central part of Israel. We traveled the next day to Mishmar HaEmek in the Jezreel Valley, which is where we spent time with the families that had survived the attacks on Nahal. And I'm not going to go deep into the painful stories of how these families, with their kids, with their parents, spent, 11, 12, 13 hours in safe houses, only to come out and find the devastation, be given 10 minutes to clear out with nothing more than the clothes on their backs, to have them lose their friends, their best friends to the violence, to hear them talk about, and this is before people started paying closer attention to, even now, they're just starting to pay attention to the sexual violence, that, Me Too applies unless you happen to be a Jew. And then people don't hear that and don't take it seriously. Parents talking about children who are in the safe rooms who are not comfortable sleeping with the door closed and having trouble sleeping. They're continuing to suffer and to stress, because it's not just that it happened, but it was their homes, it was their sanctuary. And there is a feeling is widespread among the communities that are frontline that the state of Israel, this government, broke their commitment to protect them. They would be on the front line, but that they'd always be able to count on the IDF arriving within 2 minutes or 3 minutes, not 3 hours or 6 hours. So we have a long way to go to see what rebuilding these communities will look like, but it's not only physical rebuilding, it's also about trust. Because I was traveling with the delegation I mentioned, we spent a lot of time with the rabbis who support the communities there. And for those who aren't familiar with the presence of, the reform and progressive movement in Israel, there are some places where people go to synagogues, much like they would here. But there are also parts of the country where the rabbi is like a traveling preacher in the Old West in the 1800s, going from town to town, settlement to settlement. So, there's a rabbi who is the rabbi for Sha'ar HaNegev, whose turf includes 12 kibbutzim and moshavim, and most of which were attacked. And, she knows everybody who was killed, and she knows everybody who was injured, and has performed dozens of funerals, and, continues to provide this uplifting role, but, instead of now traveling, in a small region, she's spending time with people who are evacuated in Eilat. So one day she goes there, and then the next day she's at Mishmar HaEmek for a few days. And she lives in Beersheba, so she's on the road doing this no matter what and where. We went up to Haifa, which, as everyone knows, is one of the cities that's truly a diverse city in Israel. You have Israelis, you have Arabs, you have recent immigrants from Russia and Ukraine, a very, very diverse community. And they are, of course, now hosting many evacuees in their hotels as well. That's where many of the folks from the north came. So we visited the Leo Beck School and spoke to the high school students there who are preparing for their Army duty next year. But this year they're supplementing their studies with going to the hotels to lead Kabbalat Shabbat services, to babysit, to throw birthday parties for the little kids, to give the parents some time off. We also, of course, spent time at Hostage Square, as it's called, where our group led an evening service, and we spoke with many of the families. Can I do a share screen? I can pop up a couple of pictures as well. It looks like I can. So let's see if I can find the right screen. Here we go. So this was at day 53. And the table to the left, as you've seen elsewhere, has been the empty tables that were set, with a chair for every person who was missing and being held hostage. That evening was the evening where the first rumors came that the Beavis family, those two little kids, one of whom we hope celebrated a first birthday yesterday, was the first round of rumors that they had not survived, and people were not prepared to believe or to accept the possibility that might be the case. I will see if I can scroll quickly. This is this meeting with some of the folks at Kibbutz Dorot. Here we are at Nachal Oz, meeting with survivor families from the kibbutz, but also the young man sitting next to me in the photo is a young rap artist who was at the music festival working, and he shared his story of escape with us. That story involved going to a car and starting to drive off, and then being told, no, you can't go that way, because by that point, they had figured out that driving along the road that runs along the Gaza border was going to put everybody in position to be a firing squad. So he took off on foot. He went in the other direction. He ended up on foot, I guess, about 8 hours before he was able to get someplace. Literally, sleeping under a bush to make sure that nobody could discover him, racing to stay ahead of his pursuers, all just to, hopefully find his way to safety. These are very, very tough stories to hear. It was a powerful and emotional trip. And then comes the practical stuff, which is, where do we go from here? And nobody has the magic answer as to how this is going to end and how security is going to be restored. But the small businesses that are taking on such incredible hits because their workers have been called up to duty. Met with a couple who were in their 50s and own a small art gallery in Haifa, but nobody's coming to buy art. There are no tourists coming to town now. One thing that was of concern before we went was it the right thing to do to go? Would we be in the way, or would our trip actually bring meaning? And I will tell you that I feel it was absolutely the right decision to go. And I met last week with a rabbi from the reform movement, who was here in New York to spend some time with us, New York near Barkan, from the Yotzma community in Modi'in, and he emphasized the same thing. He said, in response to somebody in our group asking the question, said, "You're not visitors. You are owners of the land of Israel, just like we are. You just happen to be in America at the moment. They want us to come. They are happy to see our support." A couple of other just notes. In terms of day to day, they are frankly more worried about us than they are about themselves. We were asked questions about the anti-Semitism in the US. Is it as bad as we're reading about? And, unfortunately, my answer had to be, one or two things might have been blown out of proportion, but mostly, yes, it is that bad. And having an 18-year-old son who goes to school here in New York, where there have been challenges of behavior and anti-Semitic comments, written on the bathroom wall. And he plays on an ice hockey team where somebody said, the Germans had the right idea, and Hitler should we should have brought back the gas chambers. And hey, Jew, what are you going to do about freeing Palestine? We have challenges here that we will continue to work on as well. The other thing, from a unity standpoint, without being
Mark, sorry to jump in here, but I'd like to give, we're at 54. I'd like to give, if anybody wants to ask any questions, I'd like to give the opportunity.
Sure. This is just the one last point I wanted to make, without meaning it to sound politically partisan. The reaction we heard from everybody across the political spectrum in Israel, not just leftists but rightists, was generally a thank God for President Biden for supporting the country, for showing up during the war in person, coming to a war zone, and for quote unquote managing the war effort, because there is a lack of confidence in the current prime minister, and they're hoping that American guidance is going to help prevent them from doing things that make things worse. With that, Rob, I'll toss it to you to open up to people.
Do you have any questions from anyone?
So one comment or question that Jen Kaufman asked was, did you guys hear any talk specifically about the political situation, the elections, or also these are kind of multiple questions, any talk about how to counter pro-Palestinian rhetoric on a global scale?
I wonder if I could jump in on that real quickly. So if I were to make a non-political comment, but just about the general consensus, I think the view is there are a number of different elements to what's going on. There's the military campaign, which, was supposed to be quick, and it's turning out to be so much longer. Then is the U.S.-Israel relationship. Then it's the Israel-world relationship. And then it's the whole concept of social media. So your specific question is a subset of all of those things. I would agree with Mark that there was huge praise for Biden, but there was also a perspective of, okay, as we go forward in the world, and what is the next thing to do? If you believe, and I know that I do, that ultimately the Abraham Accords is what's going to allow the entire area to go into the next stage, the Saudi-Israel relationship, it's going to have to be worked out somehow. Who is the person to do that? I don't know. That might be beyond what you're saying. But, and this is something I think we're all saying, Israelis don't just think about today and tomorrow when their child graduates from high school and goes into, the army. It's also, what does the world look like in 20 years? So without answering that one specifically, I want you to keep that in the back of your mind, because while the specific statement of Iran planned this was not part of the conversations that we heard, and we got a lot of briefings, it was still Iran's fingerprints are on this, and the only type of modulating force would be Saudi and the larger Abraham Accords. So that's my comment to Jan.
So I did hear a lot about Iran when I was there, but we're all speaking to different people. Politically, a lot of people were blaming and talking about many different people and things in terms of, especially like a hyper-reliance. You know, a lot of people that I met who are from the military had blamed Benny Gantz for getting rid of the NCO role, the non-commissioned officer role, and with a heightened reliance upon tech, and saying, you know, there are older soldiers there that shouldn't have been got rid of, etc. I think the overwhelming feeling for all was that some form of change is necessary. And I think Israel is feeling, that's felt a little bit like in America, that same sort of feel that, you know, old guard are ruling and nobody else, you know, who else is coming up that is worthy. So when it comes to the Hezbollah, what can be done for Israel? There's a different aspect. Look, we at the AAJLJ since October the 7th have had an explosion in terms of the work that we're doing and that we're trying to do internally here, in terms of letter writing, in terms of campaigns, in terms of bringing in new members. Today I had somebody who is a lawyer who works predominantly with the Native Americans that said to me, I'm feeling left behind. The Palestinian lobby have done very well at working together with the Native Americans. I want to be able to help. I want to be able to come in and put the Israeli approach, not Israeli, but the Jewish narrative there. What we need from the AAJLJ is time, is we need money to be able to do that in order to be able to get that out. Because believe you me, the pro-Palestinian lobbies are spending huge amounts of money on getting their voices heard. Look at the streets of New York, the streets of London, the streets of Chicago. That's not free. That's paid for, a lot of it. And we need to be doing the same. We need to, unfortunately, in today's day and age, it takes funds in order to be heard.
Good point.
I wanted to mention something about what are the next steps in addition to what Rob is talking about. So we'll follow up an email, give information on some of the organizations that me and met with. It's really a time to participate how you feel comfortable, because, you know, Mark's comment about would we have felt in the way, I know that I mean, it was more this, thank you for being here. Thank you for, I mean, it was solidarity. And there are many, many ways to participate. One of the things that I'm paying attention to is, am I focusing my time, energy, and resources well? Am I getting into, excuse the expression, stupid, fruitless conversations with people that are never going to change their minds? Like, all of these are part of how I am reevaluating things. And but there's a lot to do, and there's a lot to be hopeful about. And we live in a country where one can petition and make noise.
I've guided people to 1-week opportunities to volunteer in Israel. And for some people, they were seeking the chance to go there for 3 months. And I put them in touch with people who could help facilitate that as well, because there's, you know, this isn't going to be over for a while, and there's a lot that can be done there. But to follow on Rhonda's point, there's still a lot of advocacy and planning and support that can be done from here too.
I have a question, if I might. One of the remarkable things following the events of October 7th was, you know, Hamas and their allies have continued to have the delusion that if they attack Israel and make things awful enough, Israelis will leave. And of course, we all know the opposite happened. Israelis couldn't wait to get on planes. The planes were full, bringing back Israelis who either temporarily or permanently are living abroad so that they could be part of the defense of Israel. I was wondering whether any of our visitors had any contact with the Israelis that went back, and have any sense of whether there's whether they're more inclined to stay rather than go back once the smoke clears a bit, but just whether you had interaction with the folks that made that trip to get back to Israel.
I did. You know, not to take this over, but I did. And I mean, the easy answer to Richard's question is it depends. But there was a variety of things, because initially it was, we need, you know, doctors, we need medical people, we need people doing this. And so I think initially, and then other people said, you know what, let me just go there and be a good pair of hands. Independent of this, I do some work in a trauma release modality. And so I got in touch with people who are over there who are figuring how can they be helpful and how that they can be the most useful. I will say that that another common sign that we saw was we have a secret, our secret is that we've got nowhere else to go. So some of the Israelis I mean, I met on my flight, there were a lot of parents who are like, my son got called up and he came back. And, we finally are visiting. No one knows. They are trying to take care of themselves with some sense of respite, but the desire to be useful and to be put into the areas where one can be, that is the best answer that I have, not knowing how long it will be.
Yeah, so Richard, similarly, it depends what sort of life situation they were in. Some of them are families, some of them have whole lives of businesses where they were, some of them were traveling. I've not met many that said, oh, I'm going to take my family back from abroad and bring them back in to the to Israel. However, I did speak to one of my friend's sons who just came out of, I think it was about 72 days in Gaza. And because he's in the army and when the war broke out, it was in year 2.5 of his paratrooper training. So he was right there, young lad. And we had a long talk about how he's actually getting used to sleeping on a bed again and having his mobile phone and actually having a night's sleep without waking up constantly because any rustle. And the lad is clearly traumatized to a degree, but that's likely for anybody coming out of that long or those days in war. And one thing I asked him, I said, so when you finish, you're staying? And he said 100%. He feels like this is now part of him. And so he's not looking to leave. So with that, I think people aren't running away and people aren't flooding away.
Thank you.
But maybe I'm not altogether sure. Certainly, if I were, no matter how peacenicky I was or have been in my life, I'm not sure the people from Be'eri or Kfar Aza or Re'im will be flooding back to go and live where they were, and that's perfectly understandable.
So I think our time may be at an end, though I'm sure there are more.
Thanks, everybody.
There are more questions.
you.
Just say a couple of things as we're parting ways. Thank you to Rhonda, Rob, and Mark for sharing your stories, and of course for visiting. And thank you to everyone who joined us on this call. If you have, I know that Rhonda, Rob, and Mark are not the only ones visiting. If you have stories to share as well, please reach out and we'll give you a platform. And I know that some of you have suffered losses, and we're supporting you and sending your condolences. And please join the AAJLJ, connect with us, and continue to fight with us as much as we can, because now is really the time. So thank you to all of you for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks, Alyssa, for putting this all together. Take care, everybody.
Thanks,
Have a great day.
Alyssa,
Stay
and
warm
everybody.
if you're on the East Coast.
Very important.
Bye-bye.
Very good. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.